The meeting room was quiet, except for the sound of papers shuffling and soft murmurs of agreement among the board members. The walls were glass on one side, giving a clear view of the city outside. Sunlight streamed through, making the room feel bright and serious at the same time. A man in a sharp suit sat at the head of the long, polished table. His face was calm, but his eyes were focused, scanning the papers before him. Around him, lawyers and investors leaned forward, waiting for his final decision. It was the kind of room where every word mattered and every second counted. The deal he was about to sign could change a lot of lives, but in his mind, it was all business. He looked at the documents carefully. Numbers, graphs, and legal language filled the pages. It was impressive, really. The contract meant a massive acquisition of a property that had been struggling for years. The investors were excited, whispering quietly to each other about the profits and growth. They didn't think about the people living in the building or how their lives would change once it was sold. For him, it was just another day, another deal to make. He had done this countless times, and each time he felt nothing more than a professional responsibility. Outside the building, in a small apartment not far from the city center, a little girl woke up early. She rubbed her eyes and looked around her modest room. Toys were scattered on the floor, and a small backpack leaned against the wall. Her father was still asleep on the couch in the living room. He worked long hours, sometimes 2 or 3 jobs, to make sure she had enough food and a safe place to live. She loved him deeply, and she knew he tried his best. But today, something felt different. There was tension in the air, even though she couldn't quite understand it yet. She quickly got dressed and quietly ate breakfast, careful not to wake him. Her small hand trembled slightly as she tied her shoes. She had overheard a conversation the night before. Her father had spoken in hushed tones about a meeting he had to attend, about papers he had to sign. She didn't know the details, but she sensed worry in his voice. She had asked her mother about it, but the answer she got was vague, something about homes and money. The words made her stomach turn. She didn't want her father to be sad or angry, and she didn't want the families in their building to be hurt. She grabbed a small notebook from her backpack. She had drawn pictures of the building and the people living there. She had written little notes about the neighbors she knew and loved. In her mind, it was a plan. She didn't know what exactly she could do, but she knew she had to try. She couldn't just sit at home and wait. She had to do something, even if it scared her at the same time. In the boardroom, the man in the suit was about to sign. His hand hovered over the pen. Everything seemed perfect from a business point of view. The property would generate a significant return, and the investors were eager. The lawyers had double-checked every detail. It was smooth, clean, and final. He was proud of his work. He believed he was making the right decision, and he had no reason to think otherwise. The silence in the room was almost deafening, the tension building as everyone waited for him to put pen to paper. Suddenly, the door at the far end of the room opened. Everyone turned their heads. A small figure, no more than 7 years old, ran in, her tiny shoes tapping against the polished floor. She looked frightened but determined, her hair slightly messy and her cheeks flushed. She ran straight toward the head of the table. There was a gasp from the people in the room, and some tried to get up to stop her, but she didn't stop. She knew exactly where she was going. She reached her father, who had just started to lift the pen. Her small hands grabbed his arm, and she looked up at him with wide, desperate eyes. "Don't sign, Dad. Please don't sign," she shouted. Her voice was strong and full of fear, yet somehow filled with hope. The room went completely silent. Lawyers froze mid-note, investors leaned back in shock, and even the man at the head of the table stopped breathing for a moment. It was unexpected. No one had planned for this. A child had entered a serious, important meeting, and she was standing there, speaking the truth of her heart, Her father's face turned red. He tried to bend down to comfort her, to tell her it was okay and that she should wait outside. But she didn't let go. Her little hands were firm, gripping his arm like a lifeline. She repeated herself, her voice shaking but determined. "Don't sign, Dad. Don't let them take our home. They can't do this to us." She was speaking about more than just the contract. She was speaking about her friends, her neighbors, and the life they had built together in the building. She spoke from her heart, and the room could feel it. The man at the head of the table looked at her. He froze, pen still in hand. He had seen many negotiations, but never anything like this. The innocence and courage of the little girl made him pause. He watched her, and something inside him shifted. He realized that the deal he was about to finalize had real consequences for real people. For families, for children, for neighbors who had grown to know each other. He had been so focused on numbers and contracts that he had forgotten the human side of the work. The board members whispered nervously. Some tried to clear the room, but the man in the suit raised his hand. "Let her speak," he said quietly, almost to himself. Let her speak, and she did. She told them about the families, about the children who played in the hallways, about the elderly neighbors who depended on each other. She described the small moments that made the building feel like a community. The shared meals, the helping hands, the laughter in the courtyard. Her words were simple, honest, and full of emotion. No one could deny the truth in them. Her father's eyes were moist with tears. He hadn't realized how brave she was until that moment. He wanted to apologize for bringing her into this, but he also felt proud. She was standing up for what she believed was right. He looked at the man at the head of the table and nodded slightly, silently asking him to listen. The child's voice filled the room, echoing off the glass walls. It was a voice that carried innocence, truth, and courage all at once. The man in the suit slowly lowered the pen. He didn't speak, but his eyes softened. He looked at her father, and then back at the little girl. He could see her love for her home, and her fear of losing it. He could see the hope in her eyes, and it was impossible to ignore. For the first time in a long time, he felt something beyond the numbers. He felt responsibility. He felt humanity. And in that moment, he realized that the deal he was about to sign was no longer just business. It had faces, names, and lives attached to it. Outside the boardroom, the city continued as usual, unaware of the small drama unfolding within the glass walls. But inside, everything had changed. The air felt different, heavy with emotion and realization. The little girl's courage had created a pause, a moment for everyone to think, to feel, and to see the people behind the papers. It was a pause that could change the course of decisions, a pause that would not be forgotten. She held onto her father's arm tightly, waiting for him to respond. Her heart pounded, but she felt a strange sense of calm. She had done what she could. She had spoken her truth. And now, all eyes were on the man who held the power to decide their fate. He sat silently, looking down at the pen in his hand and then at the little girl standing before him. The room waited, holding its collective breath, as the future of a community hung in the balance, all because a brave little girl had decided to speak up when it mattered most. The little girl stood beside her father, her small hands gripping his sleeve as if holding on for safety. Her chest heaved, and she was out of breath, but she didn't let go. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner and the distant city noises outside the glass walls. Every adult in the room looked stunned, unsure how to react to the unexpected visitor. Some whispered to each other, wondering if they should escort her out, but the man at the head of the table simply watched, motionless, his pen hovering above the contract. Her father's face was a mix of embarrassment and pride. He knelt down slightly, trying to soothe her. "Sweetheart, it's okay. You don't need to be here. he whispered, his voice shaking a little. But she looked up at him, her eyes filled with determination, and shook her head. No, Dad, I need to tell them. You can't let them take our home. You promised we would always fight for what's right. Her words were simple, but the weight behind them was heavy. Even for adults, the man in the suit cleared his throat, his voice calm but firm. Please, let her speak. I want to understand. The little girl's eyes widened for a moment, surprised that he wanted to listen. She took a small step forward and spoke with a voice that trembled but carried courage. She talked about her home, the neighbors who always helped each other, the children who played together every afternoon, and the elders who counted on everyone to be kind. She spoke about laughter and small celebrations, about moments that made a building feel like a real community. She told them that the property was more than bricks and walls. It was people's lives, their memories, their love for each other. She looked at her father, and then back at the adults in the room. If you take this away, everything will be gone. We will have nothing. Please, don't do it, she said, her voice trembling but firm. The sincerity in her words cut through the formality of the room. The lawyers and investors shifted uncomfortably, audibly realizing that this was no longer just a business matter. It was human. It was real. For a moment, they could see the faces of the people who would be affected, not just numbers on a page. Her father's hands rested on hers. He wanted to pull her away, but he couldn't. He felt proud and heartbroken at the same time. She had never been so brave before, and here she was, standing in front of some of the most powerful people she had ever seen, speaking from her heart. He realized she had spoken the truth that he could not say. Her innocence, her fear, and her hope had all come together in one voice. And it made him pause, rethink, and even feel a little ashamed that he hadn't realized the human cost of the decision he had been part of. The man in the suit remained still, his pen now completely still on the table. He looked at the little girl carefully, noticing her wide eyes, the way her hands gripped her father's arm, and the intensity in her voice. He had seen children before, of course, but never like this. Never one who had the courage to stand in a room full of powerful adults and tell the truth as plainly as it was. He felt a twinge of guilt, an unfamiliar discomfort. For years, he had measured everything in numbers and potential gains. Now, he realized that some things couldn't be measured. The little girl continued, her words flowing despite the nerves that threatened to shake her. She described how neighbors helped each other carry groceries, shared meals when someone was in trouble, and watched out for the children. She told them about the small garden on the rooftop where everyone planted flowers, how the smell of fresh bread from the bakery downstairs filled the hallways, and how birthdays were celebrated with handmade cards and laughter echoing through the corridors. She spoke of kindness, of hope, and of the little joys that made life worth living. The adults in the room were listening now, really listening. Some had their arms crossed, others leaned forward, but all of them were silent. The seriousness of the situation hit them. They realized that this was not a problem to solve with money alone. This was a place full of people with feelings, memories, and connections. And it was clear that the little girl understood it in a way that the grown-ups in the room had overlooked. Her father's eyes filled with tears. He had spent years working hard to keep their home, to protect the community, and to make sure his daughter had a safe place to grow up. He had never imagined that she would step forward like this. She had given him courage and reminded him why he had been fighting all this time. He looked at the man at the head of the table and spoke softly, hoping the words would reach him. She is right. This place is more than just a building. It is people's lives. It is love, friendship, and family. Please listen to her. The man's expression softened. He set the pen down gently, feeling the weight of the decision before him. He had always believed that deals were about efficiency and profit, that the rules of business were separate from emotions. But now he could see clearly that sometimes the consequences of a decision reached far beyond balance sheets and contracts. Sometimes a decision affected people's hearts, their memories, and their futures. And in that moment, he realized that he had never truly understood that before. The little girl paused, catching her breath. She looked around the room and noticed the change in atmosphere. The adults were no longer focused on profits or contracts. They were focused on the story she was telling, on the faces she described, on the lives that would be disrupted. She felt a small sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, someone would listen. Her father knelt beside her, holding her hands. "Thank you," he whispered. "You are so brave." She looked up at him, a small smile on her face despite the fear. She felt proud, but also nervous. She didn't know what would happen next. She had done her part, spoken her truth, and now it was in their hands. The man at the head of the table finally spoke. His voice was calm, but there was a new softness to it. "I need to understand more," he said. "I need to see what this place really is, beyond the numbers." He looked at the lawyers and investors, who were beginning to murmur in protest. But he raised a hand to silence them. "This is not a simple transaction. There are lives involved, and I need to see them before making any decisions." The little girl's eyes widened in surprise. She had not expected this. She had only hoped that speaking her heart would make a difference. But she had never imagined that the man would actually pause the meeting and listen. She looked at her father, and he nodded, pride and relief written all over his face. Together, they had created a small crack in the wall of business formality, a moment of humanity that could not be ignored. She realized that courage didn't always mean doing something big alone. Sometimes it meant speaking your truth, even when everyone else is powerful and grown up. It meant standing up for what you believe in, even if your voice was small. And in that moment, she felt proud that she had found the strength to do just that. Outside the glass walls, the city moved on, unaware of the quiet revolution happening inside the meeting room. But inside, everything had shifted. The seriousness of the business world had been touched by honesty, innocence, and human emotion. The little girl's bravery had reminded everyone in the room that numbers and contracts were not everything. People with their stories, their fears, and their dreams mattered too. The man looked at her again, this time with a thoughtful expression. He was no longer just the powerful executive about to make a decision. He was someone who had seen the impact of that decision on real lives. And in that moment, he understood that sometimes listening and caring mattered more than efficiency and profit. He knew that the next steps he would take had to consider more than money. They had to consider people, hearts, and hope. The little girl held her father's hand tightly, ready to face whatever would come next. She knew the road ahead might still be difficult, but she had spoken her truth and touched hearts. And sometimes that was enough to start change. The room, once full of cold professionalism, had become a space of reflection and awareness, all because a little girl had found her voice and dared to speak. And in that moment, the world felt a little warmer, a little more human, and a little more hopeful. The man at the head of the table stood slowly, signaling the end of the immediate discussion, but he didn't leave the room. His eyes followed the little girl as she sat beside her father, her small fingers fidgeting nervously. The adults in the room watched, unsure of what would happen next. The usual rhythm of the boardroom, the confident voices, the constant flow of papers and pens, was replaced with a quiet anticipation. Everyone felt it. Something important was happening, something beyond business and numbers. Her father looked down at her and whispered, "You were amazing. I didn't think I could be so proud." She blushed, unsure how to respond, but the small smile on her face was enough to show she felt proud too. Even though she was nervous and afraid, She realized that speaking the truth had changed the atmosphere. Her words had reached someone in power, someone who could make a difference. The man in the suit finally spoke again, this time with curiosity rather than authority. "Tell me about the building," he said. "I want to understand what it really means to the people living there. Show me why it matters so much." The little girl looked at her father, then back at him. She hesitated for a moment, then began to speak again. She described the rooms she had visited with her friends, the small library in the corner where children read together, and the community kitchen where neighbors shared meals when someone was in need. She spoke of the hallways filled with laughter, the sounds of children playing, and the simple acts of kindness that made the building feel alive. Her words were vivid and full of emotion. Her father added small details, helping her explain the struggles they faced. He talked about the broken elevators, the leaks in the roof, the nights when the heating didn't work, and yet the way people still helped each other through every problem. He explained how neighbors organized events to celebrate birthdays, how they shared food and supported each other during sickness or loss. The man at the head of the table listened quietly, taking in every word. He had heard about community spirit before, but he had never experienced it like this, so real and alive through the words of a child. The little girl continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. She told them about her friends in the building, how they played together after school, how the elders taught them small lessons about life, and how everyone felt safe because they cared for one another. She explained that it wasn't just about living in the building, it was about being part of a family, a community that supported each other in every way. Her words painted a picture of warmth and love, something the adults in the room could understand even if they had never experienced it themselves. The man in the suit looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the lawyers and investors. He saw them shifting uncomfortably, realizing that this was not a normal business decision. This was about people's lives, their memories, and their sense of security. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him. The contract on the table, once just a piece of paper, now represented choices that could harm or help real families. And he could no longer ignore it. He motioned for the lawyers to stay quiet and asked the investors to listen as well. "This is not a matter of fit," he said slowly. "It's a matter of understanding what impact our decisions have on real people. We cannot just consider numbers. We have to consider their lives, their hearts, and their futures." The room was silent. Everyone understood that this was not just another meeting. It was a turning point, a moment where humanity was being weighed against business. The little girl looked at him, her eyes bright with hope. She didn't fully understand the power of her words, but she could see that they had reached him. She felt a small sense of relief. Her father squeezed her hand gently, showing her that they were in this together. Even though she was small, she had made a difference. Even though she was afraid, she had found the courage to speak the truth. The man in the suit stood up and walked slowly to the glass wall, looking out at the city. The sunlight reflected off the buildings, casting patterns on the floor of the boardroom. He thought about the families in the building, about the little girl who had spoken so bravely, and about the decisions that he had made in the past without considering the human side. He realized that change was possible. That one voice, even a small one, could open eyes and hearts. He turned back to the little girl and her father. "I need to see it," he said. "I need to see the building, the people, and what life is like there before we make any decisions. Bring me there. Show me." The little girl's face lit up with excitement and relief. She had hoped he would listen, and now he was giving them a chance to show him everything. Her father nodded, smiling, knowing that this was the first step toward protecting their home. Plans were quickly made. The man in the suit arranged for a visit to the building, accompanied by his assistant and a few board members. They would meet the residents, walk through the hallways, and see firsthand the life that had been thriving despite challenges. The little girl prepared herself, gathering her small drawings and notes to show the adults. She wanted them to understand exactly what made the building so special, and she wanted them to feel the love and care that filled every corner. When they arrived at the building, the little girl ran ahead, pointing out the areas she loved most. She introduced the board members to neighbors, telling stories of kindness and friendship. She showed them the children playing in the courtyard, the small garden on the rooftop, and the shared spaces where people helped one another. Each story, each introduction, added color and life to the building. The adults were surprised at how much warmth and community existed here. Something that could never be measured on a balance sheet. Her father walked beside her, proud and amazed. He had always known that their building was special, but seeing the adults react to her words and the real-life scenes made him understand how powerful truth and honesty could be. He realized that his daughter had a rare gift, the ability to touch hearts and open minds with courage and clarity. He felt grateful and protective, knowing that she had done something remarkable. The man in the suit followed closely, observing everything. He stopped at various spots, taking in the sounds, the smells, and the energy of the community. He spoke quietly to himself, asking questions, listening to the residents, and noting the small yet meaningful moments. He saw the smiles, the laughter, and the support people gave each other. For the first time, he understood that business decisions were not just about contracts and profit. They were about the lives and well-being of real people. The little girl continued to guide them, speaking proudly of her friends and neighbors, explaining how they helped each other through challenges, and showing the small gestures that made life beautiful. The adults were captivated. They had never experienced a place like this, a place where human connection mattered more than money. They began to see the impact of their decisions in a new light, realizing that a building could be more than walls and floors. It could be a home, a sanctuary, and a community. By the end of the visit, everyone in the group was moved. The man in the suit was quiet, deep in thought, realizing that he had been blind to the human side of his work for far too long. He looked at the little girl and her father, feeling a mixture of respect, admiration, and humility. They had shown him what truly mattered, and he knew that his next actions would have to reflect this new understanding. The little girl held her father's hand, tired but happy. She had spoken, shown, and guided, and she felt proud that she had made a difference. Her father smiled at her, grateful for her courage and insight. Together, they had opened the eyes of powerful people to the truth of their community. They had reminded everyone that behind every building, every contract, and every decision, there were people, stories, and hearts that deserved to be seen and respected. As they left the building, the man in the suit remained thoughtful. He understood that change would not be easy, but he was determined to act with care and humanity. He knew that protecting the building and its residents was not just a moral choice, it was the right one. And he knew that the courage of a small child had made all the difference in showing him the way. The visit to the building had left everyone in the group quiet and reflective. They had seen laughter, care, and the small acts that made the building a home for so many. The little girl walked beside her father, her small hand clutching his tightly. She could feel the shift in the room, the way the adults looked at the spaces and the people differently. There was a new respect in their eyes, a recognition that this place meant more than just real estate. The man in the suit led the group slowly through the hallways, listening carefully as residents shared their stories. He asked questions about how people supported each other, about challenges they faced, and about the small joys that made life meaningful. The little girl pointed out her favorite spots: the rooftop garden where she helped plant flowers, the courtyard where children played, and the small library where neighbors borrowed books and read together. Her father smiled quietly, proud that she could show them all what made their home special. Neighbors came out to greet the group, curious about the visitors. When they saw the little girl, their eyes lit up. She introduced them with a confidence that surprised even her father. "This is the lady who makes the best soup," she said about one neighbor. "This is the man who teaches us to fix our bikes," she added about another. Her words were simple, but they told a bigger story of a community that cared deeply for one another. The adults from the boardroom listened, their expressions softening as they realized the depth of human connection in the building in the courtyard. A few children were playing with a ball, laughing and shouting. The little girl ran to them, waving, and then turned back to the adults to explain. They play together every day. They help each other. They don't fight. This is why our home is important. It's not just a place to live. It's a place to grow and learn. Her voice carried honesty and hope. The adults nodded silently, realizing that this building was more than a property. It was a living, breathing community. The man in the suit stopped at the edge of the courtyard and took a deep breath. He looked around, observing the faces of the residents, the children running, and the elderly sitting on benches smiling. He thought about the deal he had been ready to sign, how quickly he had almost ignored the lives that would be affected. He felt a weight in his chest, a mixture of guilt and understanding. This visit had changed him. He now saw clearly that his choices had consequences beyond money, consequences that could hurt or help real people. Her father spoke quietly, answering some of the questions the man had asked. He explained the repairs they had made together as a community, how they saved money to fix leaks, and how they celebrated small victories. He talked about the challenges they faced, but also the joy and support they found in each other. Every word was a reminder that the building was alive with people who cared, not just tenants living in rooms. The adults listened, some nodding, some writing notes, but all quietly processing what they had seen and heard. The little girl led them to the rooftop garden, her favorite place. She showed the flowers she had planted with her friends and explained how the residents took turns watering and caring for the plants. She spoke about how the garden gave them a sense of pride and happiness, a place to feel free and safe. The adults looked around, impressed by the beauty and effort the residents had put into the space. It was clear that love and care had transformed something ordinary into something extraordinary. The man in the suit finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "I see now. I understand that this building is more than just walls and floors. It is people, their hearts, their memories, and their lives. I have to reconsider what I was going to do. I cannot make a decision that will harm this community without fully understanding its value beyond profit." His words carried a seriousness and honesty that impressed everyone, including the little girl, who looked up at him with wide eyes. The little girl's father felt a sense of relief. He had been worried about the outcome, worried that all their efforts might not be enough. But seeing the man's genuine concern and willingness to listen gave him hope. He squeezed his daughter's hand, showing her that her courage had made a difference. Together, they had created a bridge between the community and someone who had the power to make a significant change. They walked back through the hallways, talking to more risks. Idents, stories of shared meals, birthday celebrations, and helping hands continued to flow. The man in the suit took it all in, absorbing the energy, the laughter, and the kindness that filled every corner. He began to ask questions about how they managed problems together, how they supported the children, and how they overcame difficulties. Each answer showed him that this was a community that worked together, cared for one another, and had built something meaningful despite hardships. By the time they returned to the main entrance, the group had changed. The adults from the boardroom were no longer just business people considering a deal. They were witnesses to a living, breathing community, a network of people whose lives were intertwined with care, love, and mutual support. The little girl had led them on this journey, and her courage had opened their eyes to a truth that could not be ignored. The man in the suit paused at the door, looking back at the building one last time. He thought about the contract he had almost signed, about the meeting that had started as a simple business decision, and about the little girl who had shown him a different path. He realized that protecting this building and its residents was not just a moral choice, it was the right thing to do. He understood now that true success was not just about wealth or profit, but about empathy, humanity, and the impact of decisions on real lives. The little girl stood beside her father, exhausted but proud. She had guided the adults through her world, explained the importance of her home, and shown them the value of community. She had spoken with honesty and courage, and she had been heard. Her father smiled at her, filled with gratitude for her bravery and insight. Together, they had made a powerful statement that even the smallest voices could create change. When they spoke the truth, as they left the building, the sunlight cast long shadows on the streets, and the city moved on, unaware of the small but significant victory that had taken place. Inside, the little girl's impact lingered, leaving an impression on everyone who had witnessed it. The man in the suit carried with him a new understanding, a commitment to consider the human side of every decision, and a recognition that empathy could guide choices, just as power and authority had. The little girl held her father's hand as they walked away, feeling the warmth of hope and pride. She knew that the road ahead might still be challenging, but she had proven that courage, honesty, and the willingness to speak from the heart could make a difference. And she understood, even as a small child, that real change often begins with one brave voice standing up for what is right. After the visit to the building, the man in the suit returned to his office with a heavy but thoughtful heart. The silence of the boardroom felt different now, filled with reflection rather than urgency. He looked at the contract still lying on the table. Just a few days ago, it would have been an easy signature, a simple action to finalize the deal. Now it felt impossible to touch. He had seen the lives behind the walls, the laughter, the struggles, and the courage of one small child who had spoken truth with honesty and heart. He called for a meeting with his closest advisors and the Yowie investors who had been eager for the deal. Everyone gathered quickly, expecting the usual briefing. They had no idea what had changed. The man in the suit stood quietly for a moment, letting the room settle. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but it carried weight and certainty. "We will not sign the contract," he said. "Not yet. Not until we understand the impact our actions have on the people who live there. Our responsibility goes beyond profit. It goes to humanity." The room fell silent. Some investors exchanged glances, surprised by this unexpected decision. A few spoke, questioning the delay, but the man raised his hand, signaling them to stop. "I have seen what this place means to the people living there," he continued. "I have met children who love it, parents who depend on it, and a community that thrives on care, kindness, and support. If we destroy that, we destroy something far more valuable than money." His words were deliberate, sincere, and impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, the little girl sat at home with her father, unaware of the final decision being made in the offices above the city. She was drawing pictures of the building, the neighbors, and her friends playing in the courtyard. She added herself and her father, smiling and holding hands as she always did in her drawings. Her father watched her quietly, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and pride. He knew that her courage had started something remarkable, something that could protect their home and the community they loved. Back at the office, the man in the suit made calls to the Residents Association. He arranged meetings to listen, understand, and work together on how to improve the building and the lives of its people. He wanted to invest not just in the property, but in the community, helping to repair, maintain, and enhance the spaces while allowing families to stay. It was a shift in thinking, a move from profit to purpose, and he felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond business success. The little girl, sensing that something important had happened, asked her father, "Do you think they will listen now?" He nodded, smiling. "Yes, sweetheart. They listened to you, and they are starting to understand." She beamed, proud that her words and bravery had made a difference. Her small voice had reached people who could make decisions, and it had touched hearts. Days turned into weeks, and plans were put into action. The building saw repairs, painting, and improvements, but more importantly, the community felt secure. Families who had feared losing their homes were relieved, and the children played freely, knowing their lives would not be uprooted. A man in the suit visited again, walking through the hallways, talking to residents, and seeing the results of the decisions that had been influenced by honesty and courage. He noticed the joy on faces, the warmth in greetings, and the strength of relationships. It was a reminder that real value could not be measured in money alone. The little girl became a symbol of hope in her building. Neighbors spoke proudly of her bravery, telling stories of how she had stood up and made adults listen. She was admired not just for her courage, but for the love and care she had shown for others. She learned that even small actions, like speaking from the heart, could create powerful change. Her father held her close, proud and amazed at what she had accomplished. The man in the suit reflected on his life and decisions. He realized that he had often focused on efficiency and profit, ignoring the human side of business. Now he understood that empathy, listening, and understanding could lead to decisions that were not only morally right, but also fulfilling and sustainable. He committed to carrying this lesson forward in all his work, remembering the small child who had changed the way he saw the world. The building thrived, and the community grew stronger. Parents worked together, children played safely, and neighbors supported each other in ways that reminded everyone of the importance of kindness and cooperation. The little girl and her father were at the heart of this transformation. Their courage and honesty, creating a ripple effect that reached far beyond the walls of their home. One afternoon, the man in the suit returned to the building with gifts for the children, books, games, and art supplies. He walked through the hallways, smiling and talking with residents. When he saw the little girl, he knelt down to her level and said, "You have taught me something very important. Because of you, this community is safe, and people can live happily. Thank you." The little girl's eyes sparkled. She smiled shyly and replied, "I just wanted to help. I didn't know it would make such a big difference." Her father hugged her, tears in his eyes. He had always known she was special, but seeing the impact of her courage made him proud beyond words. He looked at the man in the suit and nodded, silently thanking him for listening and for changing his approach. The building, once at risk, had become a symbol of hope, courage, and the power of one voice to influence even the most powerful people. From that day on, the man in the suit became an advocate for communities, promoting decisions that valued people's lives, happiness, and dignity over simple profit. He often returned to the building to check on progress, to talk with residents, and to ensure that the work continued with care. The little girl continued to grow, always remembering the lessons she had learned, that speaking truth, standing up for what is right, and showing courage and kindness could change the world. One person at a time. As the sun set over the city, the little girl and her father watched the sky from their balcony. The sounds of children playing, neighbors talking, and the warmth of a community filled the air. She leaned against her father and whispered, "We did it, Dad. We saved our home." He smiled, holding her close. "Yes, sweetheart, we did it together." And in that moment, the world felt full of hope, courage, and the quiet power of one small voice that refused to be ignored.